Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back to the not so recent history at this point, about a decade ago, which is crazy to think about, back to the world of Forza Motorsport 4 once again, to feature another very popular car, and another car which for various reasons, but on this occasion some very understandable ones, unfortunately some real world reasons, will probably not show up in a game anytime soon, unless it's like a community-made mod, or maybe some kind of revisiting of the older text and spec that they already had for the car, because for those who don't know, of course, this car, the Mazda Furai, doesn't technically exist anymore, because it burned to a crisp. And of course, for the gaming world, that means that if they were to bring the Furai back, a lot of it would be intuition, rather than being able to, actually record the car and scan it into the game and all that kind of stuff and run it on a dyno if necessary, because you can't really do any of that anymore. And that's a shame, because the Furai is a fan favourite. It was arguably the spirit of the Mazda 787B for a modern time, and I would argue basically Japan's answer to the Pagani Zonda R. This car, which is utterly extreme, it's got this howling engine, dark colours, really sharp, pointed vibe to its design, totally track focused, only a track car, but at the same time so extreme that it can't even race either. So it's completely ineligible for both road and race uses, and it's essentially just this really hardcore lap-destroying toy. But just like with the Zonda R, having a toy like that in a racing game is perfect, because you don't have to worry about racing rules, you don't have to worry about fuel prices and reliability and the car burning down and whether or not you can use it on the street, because all of that is irrelevant, because in Forza and in Gran Turismo, and doubtless a couple of other games as well, you can use the Furai, even if you're willing to of course go back to these older games to experience it, and what a car it is, because any who have played the older Gran Turismo titles, even as recently as Gran Turismo 6, if I recall correctly, and of course in Forza as well, with Forza 4 in particular, the Furai is a car which offers so much, especially in comparison to the actual spec that it's got. Because of course it's rotary powered, as you would assume, but just like the RX-7, the RX-8, and you could even argue the 787B itself, it actually has performance which is far more impressive than the horsepower would suggest. Because the engine is a 2-litre, I believe it's a triple rotor, it might be a quad, but I believe it's a triple, and you're only putting out 466 horsepower, which doesn't actually sound that impressive, especially when I'm comparing it to something like a Zonda R or a Ferrari FXX, both of which have well over 700 horsepower, and that tends to be the kind of territory for those sort of machines, at least 700 horses. The Maserati MC12 Corsa, the FXX, the FXXK, the 599XX, the aforementioned Zonda R, it tends to be the 700 plus horsepower territory that they are in. So how on earth could something with 466 even hope to compete? Well, of course, one of the main reasons why is the weight. This is a super lightweight vehicle. In fact, unlike those cars, which tend to actually fall in line, for the most part, funnily enough, with GT1 regulations of the late 90s to early 2000s, and some of them even did race in GT1, like the MC12, but a lot of those tend to have that kind of spec, and even though they're putting out more power than a GT1 car would be, the weight is still fairly similar, around 1100 to 1150 kilos, sometimes less, sometimes more. The 599, for instance, if I recall correctly, weighs 1300 and something, like 1370 I think it is, kilos, and then the Zonda R is on the other end of the spectrum, which is like 1070. This, on the other hand, 880 kilos. That is crazy lightweight, and it's essentially a LMP car masquerading as a GT, because it's got this very supercar-esque, again kind of GT1 style body, but underneath it's just bare bones, essentially Group C car, like the 787B was, and of course that was kind of the end of that era, using that rotary engine to give the first ever Japanese team and Japanese car a win in the 24-hour race, and what a way to throw back to that. But to me, the Furai has a lot to love. I've never counted it as one of my personal favourite cars, but it's funny because it usually would be the kind of car that I would absolutely love, and I do love that they made it, at least. Now, as far as the rest of its spec, of course being a rotary, it's not necessarily going to be the torquiest thing around, revs up around 9,000 RPM, you're only looking at 278 pound-feet of torque, so not that impressive in other words, but again, it's lightweight, it's high revving, you don't really need torque. It's not exactly like you've got a lot of weight to shift. And as pretty much anyone who's played Forza 4 and used the Furai can attest to, the real brilliance of this car is the cornering. It is so fast through corners, it can actually easily rival a number of LMP2 machines. With LMP1s and especially Group Cs, you will struggle a bit more, but definitely the 2000s GT1 cars should be worried by this thing because it's so much lighter. You actually can tune it up anyway. If I recall, with the de-restricted engine, I think it's like 660 horsepower, which actually makes it incredibly good. And even in its stock 466 horsepower form, it's still an R2 category vehicle, and it's very high, 865 PI points, so it's a hefty contender. Now the price tag is 1 million credits, so it's actually not too crazy on pricing. I would say that's pretty much perfect for the car, and likewise in Gran Turismo, it's just this cornering missile. And again, it's kind of one of those cars like the FXX and the Zonda R, where in games, more so than real life of course, you tend to be allowed to use this car in events where it shouldn't really be in there. It's a car which is too good, it's too OP, not just in lobbies but in career mode even. It tends to be one of those cars which slips between the cracks, and as well as the ones that I mentioned earlier, another perfect example would be the Koenigsegg CC GT, which of course was fully intended to be a race car, but the rules changed and they ultimately didn't. But what an incredible car that is, mainly because of the huge top speed advantage that it has over a lot of the GT1 cars. And there are other examples too. The Ferrari F50 GT is a perfect one, and I would say that the F50 GT is probably, in terms of performance actually, the best rival for this car, because the Zonda R is very good, but even the Zonda R tends to have a bit more top-end strength, and the handling is good, but it's not Furai level, whereas the Furai and the F50 GT, they're both ultra-lightweight, extremely high revving howlers, or screamers, if you will, and as such, they feel fantastic when going head to head. Now the Ferrari tends to get more of the love, and of course, unlike the Mazda, the Ferrari is still around in Forza, in Horizon and the Motorsport games, but I think it is a shame what happened to the car in real life, especially because of what that means for games now, where we probably won't see it again in Forza and Gran Turismo unless they do some interesting technology or way around that where they can reference the old stuff, maybe, but even then it might feel a bit jinky. But overall, it's a fantastic car. Anyone who's played the older Forza games, this one of course in particular, you'll remember these kind of icons that we don't have anymore. Cars like the Joss, the Furai, a couple of others too, where they were incredible, and some of them have actually returned. Most notably for me, the Maserati MC12 Corsa, which of course was only in Horizon 1 as a main vehicle. I believe it was a DLC car in like Forza 2 or something, but then they brought that back now in Horizon 4, so it can happen. They did the same with Mosler. Maybe that could happen with Joss, perhaps with the Furai, but I think the Furai is probably the least likely for the reasons that I already mentioned. So if you've experienced the car, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Do a bit of reminiscing about how much you loved it, because pretty much everyone did. And as far as the usability of the car in the game, of course the online aspect doesn't really matter anymore, but in career mode it really is a weapon, and it's a lot cheaper than a lot of these other rivals typically are. But that's it for my thoughts. Of course I will see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.